Alright, now we're about to jump into Maya and do a quick 3D block mesh of our environment. We want to keep this nice and loose, very fast. We just want to take our map, take our reference images, and really try and figure out the space. Just hit those issues that we're bound to run into right now before we jump into Unreal. Alright, so we're going to start by using our existing reference images to kind of figure out what we want to do, as well as our map, kind of figure out where our points of interest are. We've got the teepees here, and I've got a waterfall. And then we're going to come in here to Maya. Based on the asset list I made, I quickly roughed in some really loose shapes of what I thought I would need. This is again based off the reference callout sheet I had. I've got a very large cliff, some more medium 360 style cliffs, some smaller boulders, a tree, a teepee, and a human player for scale. So this is our large cliff, our smaller assets that are more player height, they'll really need to be high detailed. And this just can give us a really good sense of scale right off the bat, so we know kind of what we're dealing with. Now here we're just gonna quickly throw in some of these big cliff shapes. They kind of go around this large valley that is kind of this Yosemite style thing with a river flowing through it, and so this is kind of like the look we're gonna wanna go for. So I'm trying to just lay in these cliffs real quick so I can get a sense of the space, get a sense of how big this area should be, how large these cliffs are going to be, and what I'm going to really need to make it. Now, as with anything, water kind of always flows and determines what a lot of these environments are like. It kind of erodes through these mountains and really creates a lot of these cliffs and valleys. The Grand Canyon, for example, was created entirely by the movement of water over time. So adding a body of water through a large cliff section is just kind of a way to be explaining how this valley was formed. It's been formed over time by this flow of water. And so we just want to kind of get a really nice, cool flowing river through here. It adds a lot of visual interest. The flowing movement of the water helps an environment feel much more alive. And it also gives a sense of where people would either congregate or gather. In my case, the Native American people, they're going to want to live along the water's edge so they can either fish or trade, via boats. So we want to just kind of think of these things and think of what natural environments can help benefit our made assets, and also just what would be visually appealing. Again, the movement of water, it's a very provocative image that you just kind of want to try and incorporate into your scene. Now I'm also throwing in some base terrain here. It doesn't really matter exactly how tessellated the mesh is, but we want some good tessellation in there so we can play with the height a little bit easier. Although don't just add thousands and thousands of polygons in the early stages, as it just becomes a bit unwieldy to deal with. Now here I'm just adding in a new rock. I was like, alright, well, if I'm gonna have this waterfall, I'm gonna need a very flat faced cliff that just kind of drops off, a sheer nice little drop off where, if you do have a waterfall, it's going to fall off, instead of these a bit more rounded, large Yellowstone or granite rocks. So this I'm already figuring out, okay, I'm going to need some type of asset like this that has, a sheer dropping face on it. Again, just moving some rocks around, just trying to get a feel for the space. Here on my map I had a little plateau that there was the pioneer's cabin on, so I'm just trying to put that in there, see if it's gonna fit, see if it'll work well in the environment or not. Now I'm starting to figure out what the sense of scale is. This is starting to feel a bit big, and very soon I'm going to be all right, let me grab my player scale in here and really try and figure out how big this is and if this is an actual feasible space. Again, we want to keep these scenes small and self-contained. We don't want them to be too big. We can expand upon them later, but for this initial class, we want to make sure that we are nailing our environment, nailing our organic looks, and hitting all those basics. So I've got my character scale in here and I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, this is getting a little big. All my points of interest are feeling a little far off, and I want to bring the scale back down, something a little bit more reasonable so that everything is kind of close knit so that you can still see things that are next to each other. Again, for this environment, I'm not going for a massive wide open game. I want a nice organic environment that I can get some really great screenshots out of. I can showcase my ability to create organic forms such as rocks, trees, terrain, eventually foliage in here, which we're not going to block foliage in, but beyond the trees. But keeping the scene self-contained and just making sure we nail all these things like the trees and rocks and the incorporation of man-made assets into our level, we'll be able to demonstrate our ability to create a game world. And scale for an environment like this is just eventually taking what you've done and just making it larger. Just keep going further and expanding it, but you really need to nail that base. If you don't have the base, then everything just kind of falls apart and you'll just end up with like a really open, barren environment or game world, and we don't really want to do that. Alright, so now for this river split here, as with any river, you really want to think about how does this river split? Like, why did this happen? And in this case, right here, I'm using this large rock formation that kind of, when the water hit it, it kind of split. It went in two different paths. The water's always going to follow the path of least resistance, so you need to remember that. The water's going to flow downhill. It's going to use gravity. It's going to hit rocks, and then it's going to go the opposite direction of wherever that rock is. So you need to think about these things when you're creating a natural environment, because water's not just going to flow uphill. It's not going to flow wherever it wants. It's going to flow until it hits something. Now, another thing you want to remember is, again, water flows downhill, so we want to increase the height of where our water is. Here I'm just upping the height of the water plane, so it's got a nice little gradual angle. Now here I'm just quickly cutting out this divot, but then I realized, wait a second, again, water is going to flow to the least resistant area. So if you cut in a really deep area next to a river or a lake, the water is going to tend to want to spill into that area. It'll eventually erode the earth enough where it can just slip in, and then that'll create a new pocket of water, which is maybe something you want, but you don't want this deep divot right next to your lake or your stream, because then it'll just seem really weird that, hey, why hasn't the water flown in here? Sometimes if there is like a levee of like rocks or a really big mountain of terrain, that can make sense, but generally want to kind of avoid water that's just so much lower, so much higher above a large chasm. Now here, for getting up to this kind of single, it was the Pioneer kind of thing, but you know, I'm thinking maybe more of just like a lone teepee, kind of like an outcast from the tribe. So I got to create a nice little switchback road up the rock. And again, this is showing me, hey, this is an asset I'm going to need to deal with, something I'm going to need to probably custom hand make to make this switchback terrain little system here. It's not going to be an easy kind of like instance prototype that I can use a lot. So again, I'm problem solving through this block out. I'm keeping it loose, keeping it rough, but I'm figuring out a lot of the issues that I'm going to have and a lot of the assets that I want to make. Now, a big thing people are going to easily get caught up in is the details. You don't want to spend too much time on the details. You just want to be able to get your main forms in there and be like, okay, does this work? Does this look like a trail that someone could walk up? Yes, it does. All right, let's move on. I also shrunk this area because I wanted to feel like just a solitary guy. He's just living up there on his own, a really small cliff. No one else can really hang out with him. And, you know, for this section over here, I want it to be kind of like the rocks have started to really chip away. They're kind of all falling down, and when rocks do that, they smash into smaller rocks, and those smaller rocks just eventually become dirt and soil, and so those generally build up at the base of large cliff faces. You'll never really see a massive cliff face that just goes straight down into the dirt. Generally doesn't happen because there's always some kind of erosion. Sand will build up and kind of gradiate up towards those cliff faces. And in some cases, those mountains will just essentially create a smooth gradient all the way up to the top. However, for these, you know, kind of limestone granite cliffs here, they definitely do have a lot of verticality to them, but they will always have a nice gradient up towards them where the soil is collected, where the foliage is going to start to grow up and take root. So you want to just think about these things. What's the style of your environment? Are your cliffs and mountains, you know, more triangular shaped, or are they more, vertically square shaped with some gradation outwards? I'm also remembering to constantly go back to what will be my player's vantage point, what their perspective level is going to be, where if you're on the ground, what are they going to see? And I want to take a look at my points of interest, my kind of large cliff faces. What are the silhouettes here? Am I able to see all my points of interest? And are the cliffs themselves creating interesting shapes? Here I've got these nicer round shapes on the left, and the ones on the right, they kind of have this weird gap, and I really want to fill that in so that they all kind of feel cohesive. And they also will draw the player's view down to the waterfall. The large cliffs will also help draw the eye to my point of interest of the waterfall. There's going to be this large kind of negative space where there are no longer any cliffs here, and they just will help pull you in towards the waterfall. And that's something we want to remember to do. Use our large cliff faces, our trees, everything to draw our eyes to our points of interest. Create, again, these fake leading lines that just help enforce the player's view towards something you want them to see. Now with my terrain having a lot of undulations, a lot of gradient up towards these mountains, it's a bit uneven, and now placing assets can take a little bit of time if I'm trying to raise them up, move them over to always match the terrain. So something that helps out a lot is the Make Live feature. Now what that does is you select a mesh such as your terrain, and you can what they call Make Live, and that terrain you can't really select anymore. It becomes basically locked, and everything that you place, such as a tree asset that you drag over it, it'll always conform to the surface. If there's a bunch of undulation, the assets will nicely flow along as you're dragging it. So you don't have to worry about its Y height anymore. You're just basically moving it along the X and Z. And this is really great for when you want to just quickly lay in those trees, those other smaller assets that you always need for them to follow the terrain perfectly. So it's just under the Modify tab, and it's Make Live. And you select the asset you want, which is my terrain here, and I just start dragging this tree around, and it nicely conforms to the terrain, which is great. It's very helpful. It allows you to quickly duplicate things and not have to worry about where they are in height. Now, one thing to be careful about is if you do change the height, drag the Y, the assets will always kind of follow whatever your Y position is. So if you grab a whole bunch of assets and then duplicate them and move them, they're going to follow whatever their previous Y height was at. So I haven't found the best solution for duplicating a ton of assets such as trees really quickly, but if you're just doing single ones and just duplicating them around, it's not too bad. Now, when placing things like trees, you want to use not only your trees to highlight specific areas, but you want to use their scale as well. So here I'm just kind of decreasing the scale of some of these assets to kind of highlight the broken up area of this water. It creates a nice little V right there between the large boulder that is splitting the water path. And here just, adding some height to some of these trees in this forest. There's going to be a lot of different variations of tree sizes, so you want to make sure you have that. Again, here I'm creating another little V shape with the trees and the rocks. Again, always just kind of pointing towards a focal area. Now I'm quickly laying in just some really rough bushes here, just to kind of get a sense of all right, what is this area going to feel like with some foliage? I don't go too crazy on it. I just kind of like to get a quick sense, and it generally doesn't take me very long. Now for this area over here, I was kind of feeling again, these rocks are just all kind of chipping off the larger boulder. So I just want to kind of get what that feeling is like, see if that's going to work. And, kind of throwing these in, I'm realizing, I can probably get away with just one or two rocks for a lot of these, maybe a medium-sized boulder and then some smaller ones. So that's pretty good. I don't have to worry about creating a ton of assets there, and I can focus on, some of these larger cliffs that it's clear that I'm going to need, since they do take up a lot of the skyline and do dominate quite a bit. And here just quickly again, just trying to fill in some of these spaces with some trees, some foliage, just trying to figure out what this area is going to be. It's a bit more open than the areas back here near the waterfall that have a lot of rocks. So I'm just trying to get some different kind of feelings and views in there. Even by the teepee center area, there are still a lot of rocks in there. So, in the back, I want to have just more foliage, just more trees, or, some potentially grass planes, which is kind of what I had in my map. You know, again, things have adjusted from the original map I made, and that's totally fine. That's totally okay. That's what this block mesh is for. You're just trying to figure out what your focal points are and see if they're working. So again, just throwing in some last minute little things, just making sure all my focal areas are working out. You know, I've got my waterfall, I've got my TP section with its forest, the, you know, kind of loner guy over here up top. You know, he's just kind of chilling up there. And, you know, I'm going to focus mainly, again, I want to keep this small and focus mainly on just the TP section and the one waterfall. And if I can nail those down and get those, you know, to the high quality that I need them to be, then I can go on and expand my space, expand on the areas, start detailing some of the other aspects of this level. But I do want to focus on just 2 areas with 2 points of interest that'll really help me sell the idea of this organic environment. With the waterfall, it's all organics. It's rocks, it's trees, it's, you know, cracked boulders, it's the river. And then with my man-made assets, it's the teepees, how those are going to integrate with the environment, what a clearing that these people have made to kind of create an area for their teepees, for their cooking, their fishing. So these are the things I'm going to focus on. And again, it's a really nice quick block out just so I can get a sense of what my paper map was. Once you start doing things in 3D, it's going to really change. You're going to really want to readjust, and this gives you a good sense of scale, how your map is working, what assets you'll need. And then when we start jumping into the Unreal Engine, we can use this as a great base. And that's how you do a quick 3D block mesh. Now, this is kind of what I will be expecting to see from each of you. I want to see you be able to break down your reference images, turn those reference images into a paper map, into large blocky assets that you are just going to quickly assemble in your scene. I want to see your visual style of your environment. I want to see your points of interest. I want to see your height variation that you got in there. What is interesting about your space, and is it too big? Is it compact enough of a size for you to actually finish this course in the allotted time?